evening and welcome. I'm Joyce Mason, and I'd like for you to join us during the next half hour as we discuss the issues you just saw dramatized by the New Image Teen Theater. Also joining us are cast members Mona Jones and Bobby Williams, as well as psychologist Dr. Marianne Engel, who works closely with teenagers here in San Diego. So let's get started. First, I'd like to ask our studio audience, how many of you have ever felt any form of peer pressure? Hands, hands, hands. Great. Let me ask you, which form of peer pressure did you hear most in that?
Well, lots of people want me to drink and do lots of stuff, drugs.
How old are you?
13.
So at 13, you find lots of pressure to drink and to do drugs. Is this at parties or on campus?
Both.
Both. Thank you. Thank you. Anybody else? Which was the form of peer pressure in the program that stood out to you the most?
Probably sex.
Sex?
That's the thing, but for me, I've had like a lot of peer pressure on alcohol.
On alcohol?
Yeah.
Well, what about the sex part? Do you feel like the guys come on strong when you go out on a date?
Well, it just depends what kind of guys you'd probably go out with. I mean, I don't know.
Sometimes it's hard to know that in advance, isn't it? Yeah. Thanks. How about you?
I'd probably say sex and alcohol and drugs.
Sex, alcohol, and drugs. And how old are you?
15.
Do you find this more at parties, that you're pressured to have a drink or take some drugs?
I'd say mostly at parties or if you're like on a date with a boyfriend or something.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Well, Marianne, so far we're sex and drugs and alcohol hit the top of the list. What do you think? Do you think that we put too much pressure on kids to start acting grown up too early?
We put pressure, our society puts pressure, but the kids put pressure on themselves. I think that we seem to have a fraternity and sorority within the schools where the older kids initiate the younger kids. And I have a 10-year-old daughter, and I look at her and I know within a few years she's going to look up to those juniors and seniors, and she's going to see what they're doing, and she's going to want to be like them. And what the juniors and seniors are doing is just what everyone's talking about.
Bobby, I'd like to ask you, sometimes it seems like we give the girls an awful lot of push to say no, but sometimes I wonder if there's a lot of pressure on guys to make the first move and to come on strong.
Yeah, I think there is a lot of pressure. It's not just, from the girls, but mainly just your peers, other guys. Maybe if you haven't done it yet, or if you're not pressuring somebody, you're abnormal, if you didn't do something like that.
Thanks. You're into sports. You told me that earlier.
Yes, I am.
I wonder if you're not into sports and if you're not into high academics, is it hard to fit in with kids at school?
Sports does take up a lot of your time, and so does keep it up on the book work. So I don't really have that much time to go to parties or say no.
Do you find it's easier because you have the sport to fall back on? Is it easier to say, I just can't go, I've got to practice tonight?
Yes, it is a lot easier to have something, an obligation to go to. So it's easier to say no.
Thanks. How about any of the rest of you? How do you say no? Or what happens when you try to say no? Who wants to? Come on, you guys. I know somebody out there. How about you? Is it hard to say no when you find yourself in a situation sometimes, confronted?
Well, yeah, I guess, but...
Do you sometimes use your parents as an excuse?
No.
Is it pretty easier for you to talk to your parents?
Yeah, it's easy for me, but maybe not for other people.
Thank you. What about some of the parents? What kind of parenting, or what could you say to parents who would like to help their kids to stay away from some of the things that might take them down the wrong path, so to speak? Marianne?
Well, first I'd like to address what the young man was saying about the sports. One of the things that I have found, and in talking to many teenagers, is that if you can have one friend who believes the way you do. One friend who's willing to say no the way you are. One friend who will go to parties with you but who won't drink. Or one friend who doesn't really want to go up in the bedrooms with the guys. Then it's much easier. No matter what your parents say, if you can have a friend to validate your position, it's a lot easier. And if you don't have a friend, then I think like the girl in the video, you've got to think to yourself, I'm going to be under pressure. Can I say no all by myself? And that's a lot to ask of yourselves at this age. I think what parents can do is to try in the most graphic terms possible, tell their kids what they're up against. Most parents either don't remember, deny it, or maybe didn't have a social life when they were teenagers. But they're probably not a whole lot older than I am, and I know I had a social life. The choices were different. There weren't as many drugs around. For us, getting drunk was the big deal. And that was only once in a while. The choices weren't the same, but the issues, I think, are the same. And I think that if parents can help the kids understand that with sex, for instance, that if you let a guy kiss you, well, then he's going to try the next step. And if you let him do the next step, he's going to try the next step. And so each step leads to the next.
Well, Dr. Engel, are you saying that girls shouldn't even let the guys kiss them?
Well, I think you should only kiss the guys you like.
Mona, I would like to ask you, in your scene where you poured the popcorn all over your date, a lot of us thought you were pretty assertive and pretty self-confident to do that. In real life, do you think that's real easy to do, just to get up and leave?
Well, sometimes, yeah, there's a lot of pressure on, staying and not just I think the most important thing is just to take a stand and stick with it. And if you believe that you don't, that you don't want to do this certain thing, then you should stick with it and don't feel, it's hard, it's easier said than done, but just stick with what you're feeling and, don't feel pressured into what everybody else is doing.
Great.
This is
That's a
another
great
place,
comment.
I think, where parents can be helpful. I think all kids should always have the knowledge that they can call their parents at any time of the day or night, and the parents will come get them without the third degree. And also all kids should have money so that they can call.
Well, it's
Great.
important to talk to your children about how you feel on the issues, and a lot of times it's really hard, but I know my parents have been really open with me, and it's made situations
For a lot of kids,
easier.
it's hard to talk to parents. Let's hear from a parent.
Well, I want to ask how you counsel youngsters who do want to have sex, who like each other very much and are so young they may not appreciate what that complete responsibility ensues. And I just think, what do you say to these people? They think in their own hearts it feels right.
Do you have teenagers?
No, I don't, but I have one that will be approaching it soon.
Great question. Dr. Engel, you want to take it on?
I'd like to take it on, but first I'd like to have some other parents talk about how they've handled that.
Have any parents already come up with that issue? I'm coming over.
I think opening up a discussion and the consequences that have to be faced as a result of taking that step of being sexual people, the teenagers need to know what the consequences are. If you have sex, you need to think about the result, the possibility of being pregnant, and what happens as a result of that when you're a young person. And I think openly discussing the consequences and the options that you have makes it a little easier.
How do you start that discussion with your kid, though? Say you're a parent that hasn't been real open with your child, and suddenly you read something in the newspaper, a terrible story, and you think, oh my gosh, I've got to say something. How do you start?
I know for myself, I just figured it would be easier for me if I did start. It wasn't easy to do. I remember that moment very vividly, but I figured that it would be easier if I did open it up than to keep it within myself.
Great. What do you think, Marianne?
Well, I think that there are three big issues that teenagers need to understand. One is, as you brought up, the consequences of sexual intercourse. One of the very big ones is getting pregnant. And teenagers are notorious for being unreliable contraceptors. They really want to believe that they will never get pregnant. You teenagers just think, you're indestructible. You couldn't possibly get pregnant. Well, I want to tell you that even you could get pregnant. And so that's one issue. The other issue is disease. And my heart goes out to the kids of this generation, because you have to face really incurable disease as a consequence of sex, as a possible consequence, and that's very frightening. And the third issue, which I think nobody addresses much, has to do with your future sexual satisfaction. And I think that when young people have sex, they don't really have the ability to understand their bodies, and they usually don't have the kind of communication, the kind of sexual communication that makes for good long-term sexual relationships. And anyway.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
Great comments and information for us all. We have another parent here.
Yes, on the issue of how to broach the topic of sex or drugs or alcohol, one thing that I feel real strongly about, it's real important for parents to take a stand. A lot of times parents don't know what they ought to be telling their kids or putting out to their kids, and I think that kids need to have a very strong parental input to bounce off. That's what I've learned from my own experience.
So, well, so you think it takes a strong, authoritative parent? Do you think you should lay down a lot of rules for your kids?
No, I don't mean rules so much as I mean to take a real strong stand on sex and say, no, I don't think you're ready. I think the longer you wait, the better off you'll be. No, I don't think you should smoke. No, I don't think you should drink alcohol. No, I don't think you should use drugs. And just be real firm on it and have consequences, you know, if the situations occur. I think a lot of parents adopt a laissez-faire attitude, thinking that your child will make the right choice, and that doesn't always happen.
Since we have a teenager sitting right next to you, would you stand up? How would you feel if your parents laid down the law and just said, I don't want you smoking, I don't want you out there doing that?
I don't know. That's what my parents been doing.
Well, how do you feel about that? Does it make you feel like they're not giving you a chance to make your own choices, or does it feel comfortable?
Well, I've had a drug problem. You know, I've been in 2 rehabs, and I don't know. I think it's good what they're doing now.
So you kind of like it better that they give you some backbone to lean on sometimes.
Yeah.
Thanks. Thanks for sharing that. Who's this boy's parent? Stand up. What made you start to, or did you change your demeanor with your son? Did you start letting him make his own decisions, and then after you realized he had a problem, come on a little stronger, or how did that come about?
Yes, I think that's exactly what happened. I wanted to believe that he was able to handle the situation on his own, and it wasn't until I saw that he definitely did have a problem. And through the education I got while he was in the rehab, and also through the support groups, was I able, and through my own counseling, was I able to begin to realize what my role really was and how important it was for me to take a very strong stand.
Are there other children at home?
Yes, there's another son.
How's it going? Is all of this work paying off? Are you able to stay away, say no?
Yeah, I've been off drugs for a long time now. About 8 months now.
So the scene in the New Image Theater about the party, was that fairly realistic to you? I mean, that was a dream sequence, but the fact that there are parties and your friends want you to go, and was that realistic?
I don't know. I never really went to a lot of parties. I mean, just a couple of my friends. You know.
Mm-hmm. I really thank you for sharing that. Yes.
I wanted to ask Dr. Engel why kids get involved with drugs, because it seems like it was the party scene, but yet this young man said it was just with his friends. Could she give us some insight into that?
I appreciated the mother's comment over there. We know from psychological data that there are 2 types of parenting styles that encourage children to turn to their peers rather than to their parents. One of them is what we call the submissive style, and these are parents who normally are really pretty good parents up to the age of their kids being about 12. And at that point, they decide they can trust their children, and their children need to experience life, and they allow the children to do that without proper guidelines. The other type of parent is the authoritarian parent who makes very strong rules. And both of these kinds of parenting styles lead to children who look to their peers. Whereas if you have a parenting style where the parents are open, they want to have the adolescent's opinion because they believe the adolescents need to develop opinions, but they also have their own consequences, their rules. When you have that kind of combination style, you tend to have a teenager who doesn't stray quite as far.
Thank you.
Well, in my own experience, my parents have always been real easy on me. You know, they always said, you know, they let me have my own choice. And I found that with my own choice, I'm not as pressured as much, you know. And I think that if I was told a straight flat out, no, I don't want you to do this, no, you can't do this, and if you do this, you're going to be severely punished or whatever, that I would feel even more pressured and I would want to do this more, sort of like as a rebellious thing. So,
So you like having the freedom to make your own decision? Is that what you're saying?
uh-huh. And I think that makes it a lot easier on me.
Who do you use as resources? Do you talk to your friends about the consequences or possible dangers, or who do you talk to?
I talk to my teachers, and I talk to my friends, and I talk to my mother a lot, too, about the subject. Because my mother and I are real close, and it's really neat because we can talk about these things.
That's great. What would you want I mean, say you did sometime go to a party and there were lots of drugs and you maybe were tempted to try something. What would you want your parents to do if they ever found out that you had taken a drink or tried something?
Well, my mother knows that I have drunken before. One time I got really wasted on alcohol. and my mother was real supportive, and she knew what I was going through because she, at a young age, you know, was growing up really fast. And so she knew what I was...
Do you think it made you closer?
Yes, I do, because she understands my point of view and like where I'm coming from, as in, because my mother, I don't know, she's young for a mother.
That's great that you could have that kind of dialogue with your mother. How many kids here can talk with their parents really easily? That's a lot. That's great. Thanks so much for your comments. I'd just like to change the topic just for a minute here and talk about how important is it to wear great clothes and to always look just exactly right when you go to school. And since you look so wonderful, I'd like you to comment.
It's a really big problem at our school because we go to Valhalla. And if you know Valhalla, we have, we're known as the rich snobs. So it's a really big thing.
So is there a lot of pressure to wear particular name brand things?
Yes, definitely there are.
Do you find that you aren't as friendly to kids maybe who don't have the name brand clothing?
I personally like to think that I don't care, but sometimes it's kind of hard. I mean, I really try to look beyond what they're wearing, but sometimes it's hard.
So clothes can make a difference, is what you're saying?
So a lot of people, they can.
Great, thanks. Mona, I wonder if you could speak to this, because it seems to be, sometimes I think it's more pressure on girls. And in your experience, do you find that there are a lot of girls that are kind of ostracized if they don't have the right clothes?
There are a lot of, like, people who are looked down upon if they don't, if, you know, their sweater's ripped or, you know, something like that. And then there's the people who look down upon those people because they're wearing the Oscar de la Renta or whatever, you know, Esprit. Yeah, I found that there's a lot of that sort of thing.
Do you think most kids like to look like part of the group, like look alike, or do they like to look different? They like to look real different from each other?
There's both. There's both of that. There's the people who want to, you know, be like everybody else and trendy, and then there's people who don't want to be trendy and they look against
Are they their
those.
own separate group?
Mm-hmm. Sort of.
Great, thanks.
I'd like to ask a question to our psychologist. What would you say is the best way to help our friends deal with peer pressure? I know I have to, but like my friends have asked me about it, and what would you say is the best way to help them?
How do you help them?
Well, I talk to them a lot, and I tell them the way I feel. But is there a better way to do that? Or, I mean, one of my friends gave into it, and that bothered me because I told him my point of view, and it didn't help.
Do you feel like you'd like to tell an adult?
Actually, I did.
How'd that work out?
not too good. He got in a lot of trouble.
How's your friendship with him?
It's kind of shaky, but it's getting back to stable.
One wonderful question. Dr. Engel, do you have something to add to that, or?
I think you handled it right. You know, it's awfully, awfully hard to watch a friend go down the tubes. And one of the things of life is that you can help, you can listen, you can try to bring in a trusted adult, you can try to bring in a counselor, you can do everything, but you can't do it for them. And I think you're feeling a little bit what parents sometimes feel when they watch their kids just drift further and further and further into drugs, whatever. It's a terribly helpless feeling, and I'm sure you feel rotten.
Thanks.
Yeah, I think it's real hard to say no. You know, we have the sign that says just say no and so on. That's real tough. And I think one thing that can help with that is to do some practice, to do some role playing. If you have a friend that says, you know, I think I'm going to be in a tough situation here, I want to stop drinking, whatever, if you can role play that out with them, say, you know, what's the scene you're going to be in? I'll be the other person and try to talk you into it. You try to stay out of it. I'll give you some feedback. I think that's a real helpful kind of thing. And parents can do that with kids, too. You can role play situations in practice. It's sort of like a batting practice for the Padres. You know, you don't just watch somebody on television hit a home run and say, I'm a home run hitter. You got to practice that. And
What about the fear of losing your friends if you say, I don't want to do this, I don't want to be part of it? What would you say about that?
Well, I think you can develop a strategy around that. One of the things you can do is kind of have some other things, some other set of repertoire that's kind of on hand, like maybe your friend likes to bowl or likes to go to the beach or whatever. Have some things that are okay that you've done with that friend and present another option. You know, if you have a strategy ahead of time and you've kind of role-played that out and they come up with something that you don't want to do, if you can substitute something else, then you're not just rejecting them. You're not turning them off and saying, I don't want anything to do with you. You're turning off that activity and saying, you know, but I'd like you to do this kind of thing with me. They still may reject that, but at least you've offered something. You haven't said, you know, I think you're a jerk for asking me. You just said, I think, you know, that activity, I'd be a jerk if I did that.
You think that works with your adult friends?
Works real well with adults. Yeah, we've talked a lot about peer pressure for adolescents. It applies to all of us. You know, we all get pushed into things that, you know, maybe we don't quite want to do, and it helps to practice with anybody to really do that.
Great. Thanks. Would you stand up?
I don't want to talk about parents because, you know, when a parent tells you no, you can't do drugs, or no, you can't drink, no, you can't smoke, and yet they're doing it, it's kind of confusing for the kid. And, you know, what are they supposed to think? You know, my parent's doing it, so why can't I? You know, it's kind of confusing for the kids sometimes.
So it seems like like your parents should be better role models, or parents in general should be better role models?
Yeah. Because if they're doing it, you know, the kid thinks, well, they're telling me no, yet they're doing it. It should be okay for me, too.
Mm-hmm. How do you feel about that?
Well, I think it is important that the parents, you know, practice what they preach, you know. And it's hard to follow advice from someone that doesn't follow their own, you know. That's kind of
Great. What do you think?
Well, I just think that a lot of times teens get the idea that they have to do things by, like, okay, we see, like, TV shows that says say no to drugs. And then the other day I went and saw a movie, and it said say no to drugs at the very beginning. And then during the movie, it showed people snorting cocaine. And
So it's a mixed message. You feel like you're getting mixed messages.
And, I mean, you see your parents drinking at cocktails, and then you see people doing it in the movies, and you say to yourself, you know, if they can handle it, why can't I?
Mm-hmm. Bobby, we haven't heard from you in a while. I want to ask you, it seems like there's so much out there about drugs. Do you think it's easier to say no to drugs than it is, for example, to say no to sex?
Yeah, I think it is a lot easier to say no to drugs than it is to sex, because you look at drugs and you see how dangerous, you know, and how much, you know, trouble you can get into. I mean, you can get into trouble with sex, but I think sex, it's, you know, it's not as, I don't know how to say it. I don't know what I'm saying.
It doesn't hurt as much, right?
Yeah. Well,
So
people don't realize that sex is, you know, destructive too, you know, and dangerous and can get you in a lot of trouble. But, you know, they think drugs, you know, are the worst kind of thing, but there's worse than that too.
Thanks. What's your comment?
I'd like to say something on the subject of peers. I mean, we're not all bad. I personally choose not to drink, and every one of my friends supports that, and they say, hey, that's great. And it's completely free and open, and I feel comfortable going out with them even though I choose not to drink. It's fine, and I just want to say, we're not all bad.
I'm so glad you brought that up. Yes. Here, here, here. Such a great point. I'm going to have to scoot in here. I'm going to get on the other side of you.
I just wanted to comment on parents talking to their kids. I think that the first time I had a discussion with my daughter about sex, I was scared half to death. And I think that's what's most important, is for the parents to be open and honest about their feelings. If they want to sit down and talk to them about sex, drugs, or alcohol, just to say, I'm scared and I would like to talk to you about this, or I'm feeling a little nervous. If they can be open and honest and tell them how they're feeling, it might relax the whole conversation a little bit. And I know that in my family situation, that I cannot, like the young lady over there was saying, I cannot be sitting there sipping on a cocktail telling my kids that it's no good. I've got to walk like I talk.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm glad we're getting lots of responses here. You've had your hand up for a while.
I think it's really important to have good communication with your parents. My mom and I are very open with each other, and since she has seen the New Image shows and she's seen what we do, we've been able to talk a lot more openly, and I can talk to her friends, we can joke, I can spout off facts to them, and they really like it.
What about kids who don't have a good relationship with their parents? What can you say to them?
I just think that someone should try and break the ice. It's real hard, but it's worth it, because I know for a fact my mom is one of my best friends, so I just think it's worth getting to know them.
Sounds like communication is the key here. What do you think? Would you stand up?
We were talking before about the importance of the authoritative parent, and I don't think my parents and I are that close, but the firm background that I've had, I think, helped me a lot. I was at one point offered drugs once, and it was such a wild idea to me, I just laughed, because the firmness of my background has been really what made it easy for me to say no, because it just didn't even occur to me that I would ever do that.
So it was easier for you to say no because you had strict upbringing. So that was something you could rely on. Do you ever find yourself using your parents as an excuse for something you don't want to do?
Yes, I do, often.
Does it help?
Yeah, it does.
Great, thanks.
Okay, I'm really confused right now. When you talk about sex, you mean sexual intercourse, right? What about...
What a great... No, I think I know what you're trying to say. I mean, what a great point. Is sex always sexual intercourse?
What about not going all the way? You know, you can...
How far can you go and it's still okay?
Yeah. I mean, up to a point, you know. I mean, you... Oh, I don't know how to...
I think we understand.
It's not all dangerous.
No, it's not all dangerous. Although, there are a lot of things that teenagers don't realize are dangerous that are. And those kinds of things are important. And I guess we don't need to get graphic at this moment. But there are, on the other hand, you know, one of the things that's wonderful about the teenage years is that you can have close, caring relationships. And there's certainly nothing wrong with some aspects of sexual life. I think when you get to the more deep things like sexual intercourse, then, you know.
But the further you go, the harder it becomes then to slow down.
To stop, yeah.
What was your comment?
I wanted to comment about sex. Most parents are really scared to confront their child on sex and sexual intercourse. But I think it's really important because in school they show you movies and stuff, but it doesn't really get down to the details of sex. I think it's really important that the parent confronts the child and tells them all the pros and cons of sex.
Do you think it's important for the parent to really be the one to take the lead in that, or do you think you can get a lot of information from your school?
I think you could get more input from your parents because you're closer to them. And I think the parents should tell them about birth control, about condoms, about how to be safely protected from diseases. And it doesn't always have to be bad to have sex.
We're out of time. I think it's a good point, though, to end, that it doesn't have to be all bad. Thank you so much. On that note, we'll have to end this program, but I would like to thank our panelists, our terrific studio audience, and you at home for watching. Peer pressure can be an overwhelming force, but as we found out tonight, it can also be positive and creative. Have a good evening.
Have you ever had sex to pay your dues? We took you out to burgers and a movie too. You want to pay it back, but you don't know how. And he suggests to have sex now. Respect yourself. That's the rule. Don't give in just to be cool.
Those guys who say they are your friends, they hassle you like there is no end. So yo, old boy, how was last night? When you took her out, did she treat you right? Have you done it with Connie? Have you done it with Sue? Hey, come on, fellas, just gonna respect yourself. That's the rule. Don't have sex just to be